Hello and welcome to the Exceeding Your Benchmark podcast, brought to you by Benchmark Products. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney, and today we're talking about transforming the audit process, innovations in supplier evaluations for the pharmaceutical industry. And I am pleased to bring on our guest today. Jim Freeze is the CEO of RX360. Jim, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm pretty excited about it. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Before we dive into some questions, can you give us a brief bio?
Sure. I tend to be a little bit humble, but I've been with RX360 as their CEO now for over 5 years. I started in 2018 with the consortium. And, what I find incredibly interesting is the ability to take my learnings from 20 plus years in the pharmaceutical, medical device, diagnostic world and take all of those learnings and bring them to RX360. So I have been involved in the diagnostic, medical device, pharmaceutical world for over 20 years. But the last 5 years, I think if you ever looked at me, 6, 7 years ago and said, Jim, you'd be running a nonprofit that works with all the great pharmaceutical companies and their suppliers worldwide, I never would have believed it. But I can tell you firsthand that it is easily the most exciting thing I've ever done in my career because the impact that we have.
Yeah, and it really is all about that impact. And, a lot of people, when they think of the pharmaceutical companies, they think of a lot of money being made and, of course, a lot of medicine being put out there. But, we forget at the end of the day, it's really about the patient. It's about the people that we're serving. So let's kind of focus a little bit more about what your passion is and talk about what the vision of RX360 is. Tell me how it supports the pharmaceutical industry in promoting supply chain security as well as quality.
Yeah, so our mission, again, being a nonprofit, you have the ability to really, I think, not only impact the core part of our mission statement, which is patient safety, but you also have the ability to work with all the great pharmaceutical manufacturers and suppliers worldwide to help them have the same impact. And when I look at it, I sit back sometimes and I think about the RX360 mission statement is wrapped around supply chain integrity, material quality, and patient safety, which we already mentioned. And when I sit back and I say, what really, at the end of the day, are we doing? And every single time I ask myself that question, and I probably do it, Michelle, on a daily basis, I literally go back to the patient. And everything that we do at RX360, and I don't think everybody always understands how much work the pharmaceutical industry does behind the scenes to make sure that pill, that needle, that, injectable, that nasal mist, whatever you might be putting into your body that's prescribed or over the counter, how much work goes on behind the scenes to make sure it's safe. And that is the one thing that has amazed me when, people ask me, hey, Jim, what type of an impact are we looking at here? And it's hard to quantify, but the way I always tell people is anybody that's ever taken a prescription medicine or gone to your local pharmacy and bought something and taken it because you have a cold or whatever, the work that RX360 does in conjunction with the pharmaceutical industry, we protect what you're utilizing. And I think that is so impactful and touches every single person in the United States, around the world, wherever you may be, and also provides insight into the hard work that the pharmaceutical industry does to make sure that is, kind of key and primary.
Yeah, as you said, it really affects everyone. I can't think of one person and going down from little babies and infants all the way up to seniors that isn't affected by what we're talking about here today, because we've all needed a nose spray or something, as you said, even the common cold. So this really is such a serious issue. And there's so much that you're able to do. And I love that we're having this conversation. So let's go a little bit further. Let's talk about the process and benefits of a licensable audit report for pharmaceutical manufacturers. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, it's a piece of the puzzle. That's what I'll describe it as, Michelle. It's a piece of the puzzle. So RX360, for instance, we've trademarked the model called a Joint Audit Program. And really what that involves is RX360 in conjunction with the industry, our nonprofit corporate members, we will conduct a quality audit of a facility that might be manufacturing a medicine that you might be taking. So we'll conduct that quality audit to make sure that everything's up to snuff. They're doing things the right way. Again, kind of that first step in making sure that things are safe. But then what we do is we take that audit report and we have the ability as a nonprofit to license that report out to other pharmaceutical organizations in the industry that may be using that same supplier. And what that allows them to do is also double check their ability to make sure everything's safe because they have the audit report. They can check that compliance box and say, hey, listen, we're protecting the people that are using our drugs. But the bigger thing that it does is it really eases some of the burden within the pharmaceutical industry without, decreasing quality in any way. But it reduces the burden of, doing multiple audits at a single facility, being able to, get a license and be able to use it multiple times to be in compliance, check that box, making sure that everything's up to snuff. It really reduces the burden. And sometimes it's not only a dollars and cents type of burden. Sometimes it's an overhead burden. Number of calendar days that you haven't had the ability as an auditee or a supplier to even host an audit. And without those audits taking place and without those reports being utilized to make sure everything is safe and has integrity within the supply chain, without that, we're putting the patients at risk. So it's a wonderful way for pharmaceutical organizations to work together with their suppliers to make sure that, for lack of a better term, that safety and quality message, that safety and quality information on that particular facility gets distributed amongst the pharmaceutical community, where we're actually also collectively and collaborating to police ourselves from a safety perspective.
Talking about working together, let's talk about that. When it comes to RX360's partnership with Benchmark Products, how is that helping to improve supply chain security as well as quality for the pharmaceutical industry?
In a lot of ways. Number one, I'm going to give you two scenarios here, but I think Benchmark is a perfect example of how. And I'm going to use the term consortium because that's what RX360 is. We're a consortium of all these industry partners, all these pharmaceutical organizations. You use the word collaboration. We're a consortium. It actually is in our title. And the way that we can help as a resource for an organization like Benchmark is being able to utilize that audit report across multiple partners that Benchmark might have. So it reduces their burden. It actually allows their customers or their pharmaceutical companies that they work with to literally have that faith that, hey, they have an RX360 licensable audit report that we can access that shows them that everything that Benchmark is doing to protect the patient is there and it's in place. And so it ultimately helps Benchmark from that burden standpoint we talked about before, but it also gains that consortium mentality amongst all the pharmaceutical manufacturers that they're looking at the same information, they understand it, and they know that it's put in place to ultimately take care of the quality and safety issues. That's why those audits take place, and that's why ultimately those audits have the ability to be licensed out across the industry.
It all sounds good, but of course, results, right? It's all about results because it can sound amazing, but what is it actually doing in practice? So let's talk about that. Can you share maybe some examples of how pharmaceutical manufacturers are using the licensable audit report to demonstrate compliance and, basically improve their operations?
Great question. And one of the things that I like to talk about all the time is you can do 50 audits, right? 50 different suppliers. And all those audit reports come back and they're all clean. T's are crossed, I's are dotted. Everything's perfect, right? You would obviously say, wow, that's a really good thing because that means that all these facilities that are manufacturing and supplying things to the pharmaceutical industry are all T's are crossed, I's are dotted. Everything's great. I also put another different kind of filter on it too, on how it helps the industry. And sometimes people look at what I'm about to say as as a negative, but I actually look at it as a positive. Sometimes when these audits take place, there's observations that are made. The auditor goes in and they look at something that they're inspecting and they say, oh, wait a minute, that's not quite right. That has to be fixed or changed or improved. To me, that's the positive testament to what we do as an industry, because we're looking at constantly improving practices, improving how we manufacture pharmaceuticals, and making sure that those quality initiatives are always going like this and not stagnating like this or even going downhill, because that's when you kind of have a little bit of a challenge. So sometimes for me, and this is just me personally, sometimes for me, I'll see an audit report that might come back with 3 or 4 observations of things that need to be, quote, fixed. And I look at it as, wow, that's the industry working together to get better, rather than somebody playing Mr. Police Officer to say, you need to go fix this. It's truly that consortium mentality to look at the audit report, to look at that inspection and say, hey, we're working together on this to get better. And I think that's what maybe the general person walking down the sidewalk, Michelle, doesn't always think about, is all those pieces of the puzzle that go into making that prescription drug or that over-the-counter drug safe for them to use. Sometimes, listen, I'm just like anybody, I'm a patient too, right? I'll get a prescription or go to my local pharmacy and pick something up. And I'm the first one to say that probably for years I took for granted that whatever I was buying and putting into my body, we were all good to go. I never thought about it. It's that very trusting mentality. And what I have come to know now is there's a comfort around that trust, because working as I have for RX360 over the course of the last 5+ years, that trust is real because I see what goes on behind the scenes with all these pharmaceutical companies and making sure that patients are safe. And that message doesn't get out there enough.
Well, there's no perfect system, as we all know. But as you said, as long as you're going up, we're striving to get better and better and make things as best quality as they can. Once again, with the ultimate goal of having that patient as the primary reason for all of that thought process and making sure that they're safe. So as we're wrapping up here, any final thoughts, Jim?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that if I had to take away, and I say it to people all the time, is it's wonderful to have a peace of mind that there's not only organizations like RX360 out there, but there's companies like Benchmark, there's other pharmaceutical companies, both manufacturers and suppliers, that truly do have the patient in mind. They truly do have patient safety as their primary objectives. And again, I think sometimes as just a society, we forget about that. That there's so many people, so many dollars, so many resources behind the scenes that go into protecting us. And I just think it's a message that has to get out there a lot more.
Jim, I'm sure a lot of people are listening and they may have some questions. What's the best way to have those questions answered, or how can they connect with you?
You can always reach me through our website at RX360, which is the normal www.rx-360.org. I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free to, anybody wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love to use that as a tool. I think it's a great way to network, but I am readily available. So anybody can always reach me by just contacting RX360.
Wonderful. Jim Freese is the CEO of RX360. You heard him talk about his contact information there, and always on LinkedIn, so you can reach out there. Jim, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed this conversation, and it is so important, such a necessary conversation, because we have to have these talks. As you said, you're also a patient, and a lot of people don't realize how much goes into the process behind the scenes. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Michelle.
And thank you for listening and viewing this podcast, Exceeding Your Benchmark podcast, brought to you by Benchmark Products. Of course, if you'd like more information about Benchmark, you can go to benchmarkproducts.com. Once again, thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. We hope to see you soon.